Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for participating in this training. I am Alice. I will guide you a little bit throughout the day, but I will tell a little bit more about myself later on. I would start by saying like one quickly practical information, and that is that this training is going to be recorded. And that the video is going to be used for dissemination within the Changer platform. Also, this training is a part of the Changer project. That is a EU funding project under the Horizon Videra scheme or program. And the scope is to support ethics review of research projects that do include new technologies, such as electronic informed consent. So this is the first actually training of a series. We will also have one coming up soon on gene editing. And in autumn, we will follow also with the 2 more trainings, one on organoids and one on AI. I would now start sharing my slides. Is that working?
Yes, thank you.
Perfect. All right. So apologies. What is the agenda for today? Very quickly, I will start with a short introduction on informed consent, traditional informed consent, and then we will discuss the bulk of the day is going to be discussing whether electronic informed consent could actually be a valid and ethical alternative to traditional informed consent. And so we will look at both the legal landscape, but also at the ethical landscape. And then the final part of this training is going to be a little bit more of an applied ethics session. So we will have a case study, and then we will be divided in breakout rooms to have a discussion on the case study and try to really get into the nitty-gritty of discussing what is the ethics of an electronic form of consent in practice in a real case. And then we will also have a plenary discussion about it. Sorry, I'll just keep an eye on the time. So, as I said, I am going to start today with a first session on informed consent. Now, of course, I do kind of know that you will all know already what informed consent is. So this is not going to be too long, and it's not really going to be particularly in depth. It's more to give kind of a refresher of the key points of traditional informed consent that they will be needed to be able to discuss electronic informed consent. Because of course, electronic informed consent is not something completely new. It doesn't come out of the blue. It does kind of build on what is already there when it comes to informed consent. So this sort of like general basis is actually needed. Why is not working? Okay. I always start with introducing myself. I think it is nice. I'm sorry for the little question mark there, but I had a problem with pictures this morning. I couldn't find a better way to fill the slides. So I am Alice. I have a background in philosophy. I studied philosophy in Italy. And then I moved to Leuven to study bioethics, and my research does focus on research ethics and specifically in neonatology and pediatrics. So this is a little bit my background and where I come from. So when it comes to informed consent, I would say I'm more experienced with informed consent for vulnerable population of people who are not, who don't have legal competency to provide informed consent. So what I am going to talk about today, I am going to give a very brief historical introduction to informed consent. So how did we came about to have informed consent in the first place? What informed consent actually is, and specifically what are the requirements for informed consent. So I forgot to say, if you have any question at any point, please just just ask your question. Don't raise your hands or write it in the chat because I won't be able to see it. So please don't feel afraid to just interrupt me and ask your question. I really prefer it this way. So why do we have informed consent? Despite the fact that this is a very foundational concept in bioethics and is an absolute requirement when it comes to research with human subjects, informed consent is not actually that old. And the origin starts around about the end of Second World War, and specifically with the Nuremberg trial. And that's because especially during the trial on doctors, it became pretty obvious all the atrocities that this doctor committed within concentration camps, and not only on the prisoners, in name of science, so to speak. I put on the right is a picture of the Nuremberg trial, and on the left is an example of such an experiment. This is a high altitude experiment that was done with a Soviet prisoner, and the idea was to expose the prisoner to a high altitude condition without any sort of minimization solution, just to try and see how far the human body could go basically before dying. So what this trial made it very obvious is that a lot of these experiments had no real scientific value. So there was no real societal benefits, no real knowledge gain. And even when they had some sort of scientific value, they were still unethical because of how they were conducted. And this for me is particularly important because it's not true that all the experiments that were done were pointless. Some of them were really useful, but the usefulness does not change the fact that they were unethical and should have never been done in the first place because of how they were done. And the main problematic points, not the only ones, but the main ones, were the fact that there was no regard for human dignity, no regard for the participants. They were prisoners after all. So there was no real promotion of their benefits, and there was absolutely no minimization of harm in place. And secondly, the problem was that these were prisoners. So they were absolutely not allowed to choose whether to participate or not in these experiments. They were forcibly enrolled, literally speaking. And because of that, this is, as a result, we did have the guidelines that really specified what are the criteria, the ethical criteria for us to do research. And one of the main points was that participants themselves need to agree to participate in the research, and this consent has to be explicit. It can't be just inferred by the researcher. And this is important because it also kind of signified a societal shift. If before we kind of took for granted that, scientists would have never gone too far, so it wasn't that necessary to have a consent. It was placed more relevance on what was the collective value of doing research. Now it's shifted and showed that, of course, collective value is important. If research doesn't have a scientific value, it shouldn't be done. But even when it has scientific value, it is absolutely important. It cannot be done if the participant does not have provided consent. So what is informed consent? Informed consent is defined by Chamou and Resnick, and I chose this definition because it's not the only one, but is pretty clear and all-encompassing. Is defined as a freely taken decision whether or not to participate in a research project based on careful consideration of both advantages and disadvantages of participation for the person involved. And the reason why I underline for the person involved is that when we are discussing advantages and disadvantages or risk and benefit of research, we need to do it at different levels. So first of all, the researchers and the ethics committee will evaluate more at a population level, whether what are the risks of said research, and they will do a risk-benefit assessment to ensure that the risks are not exaggerated as compared to the benefits. So it's important that the risks are minimized as much as possible and that the risks are not excessive. if the risks are excessive, the research cannot go further. But this is done at a population level. However, there is a second level that is the level of the individual potential participants. And they are also entitled to make their own risk-benefit assessment to decide whether they individually want to participate in that specific research. And that's important because, of course, as a researcher, you can evaluate a lot of things, but you cannot consider everything, and individual people will make different choice based on different factors that are really unique to them. So you might have different people make different choices, and you can have people that decide that even a research that in principle is to have absolutely minimal risk, for them is too much, and they do not want to participate. And this is absolutely okay. It doesn't mean that you don't need to do the research or you have to stop it. It just means that this potential participant is not going to be a participant in your research. And that's perfectly fine. So just a couple of really, really important distinctions. The first one is that informed consent is not a contract, is not legally binding. And this might sound quite weird because I know that in a lot of countries, if not most of countries, informed consent is actually a legal requirement. You cannot enroll a participant in your research if they didn't sign an informed consent. However, this is a legal requirement, but it's not legally binding for the signatory in the sense that as compared to any other contract where once you sign it, you're kind of vinculated by the contract, and either you cannot rescind, or if you rescind from the contract, there is a penalty or there is a whole process to do it, and this can be quite complicated. When it comes to informed consent, this is absolutely not the case, because one of the fundamentals of informed consent is that a person is always free and allowed to withdraw from a research at any point of the research for any reason without having to provide an explanation. Which is not to say that you can't ask for an explanation, because sometimes it can be valuable to know it, but you need to very carefully frame how you're going to ask, and you need to not pressure the person to give an explanation, and the person is not obliged to give you an explanation. They can stop it at any point. So in that sense, it's not legally binding, because even if the person signed an informed consent, they can always rescind it at any point, and it has to be made really easy for them to do so, and they need to know that in advance. The other important distinction is that informed consent is not a form. So I know, yes, the informed consent is physically expressed in the informed consent form that a researcher needs to provide, and that the participant, on the other hand, needs to sign. But this is kind of just the end of the story. It's not all that informed consent is. Informed consent is the whole process of actually providing this information and making this decision. And even more than the form is really the freely given choice to participate in research. So of course, the form is extremely important. How we phrase the form, what information we give in the form is extremely important, but it's not all that there is to informed consent. Is a lot broader, and it's really important to remember it. And to make a very, very small but concrete example, if you do have a regularly signed informed consent, but the participants did not receive all the relevant information, or for some reason they didn't really understood them, that consent is not really informed, is it? Because that information side is missing. So just to keep in mind that the form is important, but it is not the whole of informed consent. So far, so good? Seems so.
Yes.
Thank you. So what are the requirements for informed consent? Because as I said before, there are some requirements. Not any sort of consent really counts as informed consent. There are three main requirements. Again, I'm kind of simplifying here because we need, it's not, the focus of this training is not informed consent per se, but the three main requirements are that the person needs to be able to provide consent, that they need to be adequately informed, and that they need to be free from undue influence. And now we are going to look at them a little bit more in detail. So the potential participants need to be able to provide consent. This seems pretty self-explanatory. You can't really provide an informed consent if you're not able to consent in the first place. But what does it mean that you're able to provide consent? Practically speaking, this has, again, two sides. The first side is that the person needs to be able to understand the information that is given. And secondly, that the person is able to make a decision based on said information. Of course, a person will not only make a decision based on that, because they will integrate that information with their own values, beliefs, personal experiences, as we said before, their own evaluation. And in that, it's also important to remember that just because a person is making a decision that might be surprising, or even if the decision per se is not surprising, but like the reasoning behind it might sound a little bit weird, but if it is consistent with the person life story, is a decision that is made, there is internal consistency in the person reasoning, that doesn't mean that consent is not valid. So just because a person might make a decision that is surprising, that doesn't mean that the consent is not valid. That's really, really important. It's not a situation where, let's say, what a reasonable person would do does apply, because it really matters more what is the individual person deciding on. However, it's again important to make some important distinction, and that is, when it comes to consent, is really important to distinguish between what is legal competency and capacity. So legal competency refers to the ability of an individual to participate in legal procedures. This is the generic definition. So put simply, whether a person is actually legally allowed to sign the informed consent, and if they sign the informed consent, if that consent is actually legally valid. Now, when it comes to adults, this is generally presumed unless you have a very good reason not to. So that could be, for example, if you have an elderly that suffer from dementia, in some case, then they might not be able to have legal competency. And it's the case, generally speaking, for minors below 18 years or whatever is the threshold in the country. Generally speaking, the minor is not really allowed to sign their own informed consent because they don't have legal competency. What happens in this case is that generally you have what is, ethically speaking, called a surrogated decision maker, so someone who makes a decision on behalf of the potential participant. And you might have a legal guardian, especially when it comes to, again, not competent adults. Normally, the court will appoint someone that is legally entitled to make decisions on their behalf. However, this is really a legal requirement. There is a very big difference between having legal competency and being actually able to make a decision. And this is pretty evident. It's the easiest example is when you have a minor. If you have a 17-year-old and 364 days, according to the law, is not able to sign the informed consent. That said, does not mean that is not actually able to make a decision for themselves on whether to participate in research. And this happens a lot with potential participants that might not have legal competency, but they actually have capacity. And capacity is defined as a functional determination of an individual, of whether an individual is or is not capable of making a decision within that situation, which basically means that you might have a situation where you have a person that has no legal capacity, as I said, competency, sorry, as I said before, but can participate. So what do you do in that situation? Well, that person will not sign the informed consent, and that's perfectly fine, although sometimes you do have double forms, one for the legal guardian and one for the potential participants, if they are capable enough. But you can still involve them in the decision making. You can still provide them all the necessary information. You can still gather whether they would want to participate in research or not. And you can take that, you should take that into account to make the final decision. Also, it's important not to take for granted the other way around as well, because that can happen. It could be that you have a person that has legal competency, but doesn't necessarily has capacity to make a decision in that specific moment. And that could be for multiple reasons. So I will make a practical example. As I said before, I look into research done in neonatology and pediatrics, and I did my PhD on extremely premature infants, which are infants born very, very suddenly, very, very early. So we know that parents in that moment, at the moment of birth, they are often very overwhelmed, and it's difficult. They need to take a lot of decision in that moment. And it's difficult to grasp all the information. So of course, there are some decisions that have to be done on the moment, so you cannot really go around it. But maybe whether to enroll their child in a clinical trial, that might not be the right moment to ask them that. Doesn't mean that you don't need to ask them that, because they're perfectly capable to make that decision. Might just mean that you need to wait a couple of days for them to have taken that in. So this is just an example, but to point out that sometimes just because a person is legally competent does not mean that they are always able at any point to make a decision, and you need to also be able to be sensitive to that. So a much better question for a researcher wouldn't necessarily be, does this person has legal competency, but rather, is this person able to make a decision on whether to participate in research in this moment? And if the answer is no, then you need to look into how to approach the thing, because a lot of time you can work around it. It doesn't mean that you need to exclude the participant. It just means that you need to find a better way to approach the potential participant. The second aspect is that the participants needs to be adequately informed. And this corresponds to an obligation on the side of researchers to actually inform potential participants adequately. And this again has two sides. It has a what side, so what do they need to tell a participant? And this is all the relevant information, which generally speaking are the scientific background. So what are the goals of research and what are the methods? So literally speaking, what's going to happen to the potential participant? What are the risks and benefits? And what is really, really important is that risk and benefits are not only physical, but it could also be psychological. For example, in a lot of social science, you might not have a physical risk if you do interviews, but if you're going to talk about very sensitive information, that there can be a psychological risk that also has to be accounted and also has to be minimized and also has to be disclosed. Financial risk should also be disclosed if there is some financial burden for participants. As much as possible, this should be avoided, but sometimes a little bit it's inevitable. So it's important that the person knows that as well. And of course, they need to know the rights of as participants. So they need to know what are the rights, and especially the fact that they can withdraw. What is also important though is the how, because again, if I give information that is really scientifically accurate, but is incomprehensible, that informed consent is not really informed, it's not real consent, right? Because information has not really been understood. So it's important that this is explained in a comprehensible way. So for example, avoid any word that is too technical, that is really jargon, so too specific. Of course, if you have people with different level of capacity, you need to adapt the information. You're not going to talk to a 30-year-old in the same way in which you're going to talk to a 10-year-old. And of course, it needs to be sensitive to the potential needs of every participant. So for example, if they need information to be repeated, if they need information to be given with a different formats, of course, allow enough time for questions and as much as possible, enough time for reflection as well. So the how is also important. And finally, the potential participants needs to be free from undue influence. Again, if the informed consent is kind of pressured or coerced somehow, that is not really consent either. And this, again, as always, has two sides. There is a side that it comes from the participant. So the participant themselves needs to be free from controlling influence, which means that if it's somehow pressured by externally, for example, that's important to be taken into account and to minimize it. Pressure can also be internal sometimes. So again, if a person seems to be willing to participate in research more because they feel they have to be a good person. That's also something that has to be accounted for and minimized by a researcher, and they need to avoid that from happening. On the other hand, though, this also corresponds to an obligation from the side of researchers who need to offer an actual true choice, which means that they need to avoid any kind of situation in which they are, of course, forcing, frauding, or coercing the participants to participate. They should avoid deception, although this sometimes can be needed for research itself. So deception is not always completely ruled out. But if researchers need to use deception, then they need to be really disclosed in the research protocol for the ethics committee, and that needs to be very, very carefully evaluated, whether deception is truly necessary and what could be the harms of using deception as well. So yeah, deception is a bit of a special case here. What's also important is to check your own bias, because what can happen sometimes is that people end up pressuring potential participants with the best intention without really realizing that, not because they are a bad researcher or they are bad people, but just because they don't realize that they are kind of letting their bias going a little bit too far. They are a little bit unchecked. And the easiest example is when you have a researcher that is particularly positive about their research, is particularly optimistic and excited, which is of course normal. You should be excited about your own research, but in talking with participants, potential participants, you need to be careful that maybe you're being very excited about your research is not maybe putting an undue pressure on the participant to participate. So it's really, really important to be sure that you're giving information as much as possible in a neutral way. So do you have any questions so far?
Thank you, Alice, for such a nice presentation. So my question is wanting to get a clarity, in particular the last point in terms of undue um, influence.
Yes.
When you're working with vulnerable groups, such as people with disabilities, and then people with disabilities, they are adolescents, and then also from if I would call an economic a poor or an economic disadvantage background, how do you manage um, the administration of the consent form in a way that they will still, you mentioned something very important, to check your own bias as a researcher, you as a field, administering the consent form. But on the other side, the participant already is exposed to other factors that make the person susceptible. Whether you try to be neutral in a way, in a sense, there might be some level of influence because you are a researcher. They might see you as a savior, or even the way you presented the study, we always make, somehow declare, make a statement to say this study will help you. Whether it's an immediate, let's say, immediately or in the long term. You're not sure. You are seeking for you're investigating something. You want to know something, but the direct benefit is not well determined. How do you manage so that this person is really free to say, I want to participate, I do not want to participate, because they're already at a certain disadvantage level or at risk? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a very difficult question. And that's because this is a principle that makes perfect sense in theory, but it's very difficult to apply in practice, as often happens in ethics. Because there are a lot of issues in one apparently simple problem, that is, how do you administer informed consent in this case? It's indeed one of the most difficult things to do. I will mainly refer to minors because that's really my main expertise. So I don't want to say things that might not be really true. The one very important thing that's generally often done is that you really need to evaluate the risk and benefit very, very, very carefully, because if it's too risky, it shouldn't be done. But I would say that generally speaking, this is not the biggest risk, because if anything, we are too conservative when it comes to vulnerable population. So we are quite quick in excluding them from research for protection, which is a problem in and of itself. But of course, if the risks are too high, the risks are too high. That is goes without saying. How to inform them, that's also extremely difficult. I will say that honestly, a certain level of bias in anyone is inherent, and some form of pressure is probably inevitable in one way, shape or form. So you cannot completely zero that, but you can do everything you can to minimize it as much as possible. How I would approach it is try to really understand what are all the vulnerabilities in that case, and try to address them one by one, and to be sure. So for example, if the problem could be that there is an economic disadvantage, then be sure that you're not providing a financial incentive that could create undue influence. If the problem is more at the level of informing, again, be sure that you're providing information in a way that is understandable for the person as well. And you can use different tools. Depending on people, I know that for children, for example, they're now starting to use virtual reality to show them exactly what's going to happen to them. That's also in clinic, for example, to explain them what an operation is going to look like. You can use videos, you can use different format that is not just a classic written informed consent, that maybe it's very good for some population but might not be very good for other population. And how to develop that co-create, that's really important. You can talk with people that maybe are not potential participants, but they have the same characteristics of the population you want, and so you can ask them, what do you think that this is complete enough? Do you think that this is understandable enough? What would you want to know? If that would be you, what would you find important to know? And you won't solve all the problems, but it surely gives you a lot more insights of what that your potential participants might really need. I hope this answers your question. I know it's not comprehensive because that's really difficult, but I tried my best.
Thank you so much, Alice. That's very nice. I really appreciate it.
Yes. Hi, Sembra.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Alice, for the presentation. Just want to note or underline fact, which is the best example for it is, am I going? I hear my voice twice. I don't know why.
No, I hear you.
Okay. The best example is Pilgrim electric shock experiments. Sometimes researchers hide the true purpose of the experiment because otherwise they cannot get true responses. So that experiment was done and then subject to many ethical criticisms. So in addition to risk-benefit analysis, I think maybe it is hidden in it, but we need to highlight the importance of participant autonomy, dignity. So it's not just the simple cost-benefit analysis. Yeah. So it's very utilitarian, as we say in philosophy or ethics, but beyond that, we need to consider dignity, well-being of spiritual or material, physical well-being of participants as well.
Yeah, of course. I agree with you, and thank you for that. Indeed, deception is a very difficult case. We had a colleague in the past that worked specifically on that. So when is allowed to use deception, how can you do that, and how can you do ethically, and how can you evaluate what is the impact of using deception? And of course, in that case, it's not just a risk and benefit of the research per se, but you need to also evaluate what it means to use deception. Personally, I always consider like hurting someone's autonomy as a risk as well. That's why I included in that, because indeed, like when you are limiting someone's autonomy, when you're hurting their autonomy, you're also you're hurting the person, you're impacting on their dignity. So I do kind of consider that as well as the risk that you need to consider, the harms, and what you need, how you need to minimize it. And indeed, that is also considered as well when you do deception, whether this is actually going to infringe on the person's dignity and autonomy. And if that's the case, yeah, normally you are not allowed to do that research as well. And there should be ways, as far as I know, for example, if you use deception because it's proven that it's really needed for that specific case, but then afterward you need to inform the participants, and if it's necessary to provide counseling, and to be sure that the person then afterwards is not excessively hurt by the use of deception. I think you also need to be very careful on who you are enrolling, because if for that specific participant, for example, you see that this is not a good idea, it's going to be excessively hurt, then you shouldn't include that participant. So deception is a particularly different case, but it was just to say that deception is it's a not black or white situation as it is with coercion. There is never a good ethical justification to use coercion, but there can be a justification to use deception if done in a certain way. And for considering also dignity and autonomy, absolutely, yes. I'm sorry if I give the impression that is only risk and benefits. No, it's beyond than that. I agree completely. Other questions? Okay, then we can, perfectly on time. So we can move forward and introduce electronic informed consents, or eConsent for shortness in the slide and simplicity for me to say it. So what is electronic informed consent? So electronic informed consent is defined by the EMA, or European Medicine Association, as the use of any digital media. So it could be text, it could be graphics, it could be video, podcast, or website. So any format that is digital, to either convey information related to the clinical trial, so at the information level, or to document the informed consent through electronic devices. And that could be, for example, mobile phone, tablets, or computers. These are the most common. So it can be either to inform participants or to store the informed consent and to obtain it. Now, because I know that this can be a little bit abstract, we do have a demo video that shows how to develop an actual electronic informed consent to give a more concrete idea. And I will switch screen because every time I try to put a video in a slide, it never works. So I think this is going to be easier. Okay, is it working? Looks like.
As a proof of concept for electronic informed consent. Welcome to this demo where I will guide you through an example of an electronic informed consent form. This form has been designed as a proof of concept for electronic informed consent for research purposes as part of a research project funded by the KU Leuven. For now, the platform is only available in Dutch, but we will take you step by step through the features it offers. While the precise content of the informed consent information is less important for this demonstration, we will focus on explaining how the platform works and the benefit it brings to users. The first thing potential participants will encounter is the authentication process. There are several ways one can log in securely. Potential participants could authenticate themselves using It's.me, which is a widely used digital ID solution specific to Belgium. Alternatively, participants can use an eID reader, log in with a username and a password, use a token provided by the clinician or researcher. These different options ensure flexibility and certainty most suited to their needs. After, will be directed to the dashboard. Here, They can see an overview of all the studies in which they are currently involved. The dashboard has a user-friendly design, displaying every study in a clear, organized manner. Participants can easily track each study progress, whether it has ended or if an action is required from them. Additionally, participants could view detailed information, such as which physician researcher is leading the study of the study. This overview provides a comprehensive snapshot of a participant's involvement across various studies, all in one place. By selecting a specific study, potential participants can access more detailed information. This page displays the study details outlining the title of the study, the principal investigator's name, and the contact details of key contact persons to reach out to in case of questions or concerns. These contacts might include the principal investigator or other members of the research team who can provide specific information, assist with problems, or address any concern. Now, let's move on to the informed consent section, which is at a core part of this platform. At the bottom of the page, outlining the study details, potential participants will find the informed consent section. Here, they can view and sign the informed consent form, although the process involves more than just a signature. It is designed to ensure that participants fully understand the study before agreeing to participate. The electronic informed consent process is divided into 3 clear steps. Step 1 requires the potential participant to review the study information. Here, users are presented with all the relevant details. It is important that users carefully review all the information, and the platform guides them through the content to make sure that they do. Step 2 allows potential participants to discuss any questions they have. They are encouraged to raise their concern or express the doubts resulting from step 1 to the researcher. This step ensures that uncertainties are addressed before proceeding to the next step of the process, which entails signing the informed consent form. Upon clicking the OK button, potential participants are directed to the overview page of the informed consent form, presenting all the relevant information. Each step within the platform represents a different study aspect, such as treatments, procedures, risk and benefits, or cost and compensation. Clicking on a tab then presents participants with several topic-related questions, which are answered by making use of different layers of information. This fragmentation of the information into smaller sections makes it easier to digest, as does the division of information into a brief overview and more extensive information. The brief overview provides a concise summary of the most relevant information to answer the questions, but if participants wish to have more detailed information, they can click to view the extended information which offer deeper insights. Medical terms are highlighted, and by clicking on them, users can interact with the platform to see definitions or additional explanations pop up, helping them to understand complex medical jargon. The platform further supports interactions so that participants can have their questions answered. Whenever something is not clear, participants can click the red button, which prompts them to highlight the part of the text they find unclear and to subsequently submit this text along with their question. For more general inquiries that are not tied to a specific part of the text, there is a button at the top of the page labeled Ask a General Question. This flexibility allows participants to raise specific or broad concerns, ensuring that they can fully understand the study. As potential participants read and understand the information in each step, they can mark it as understood, making the tab turn green. This visual cue helps users track their progress and ensures that they have reviewed every important part of the study. Once all tabs are marked as complete, they can discuss their questions with the researcher. To do so, participants can book a video consultation directly to the platform with the responsible researcher. To assist them, participants will get to receive an overview of all the questions they've had while going through the different information sections. This step ensures that any uncertainties are addressed before proceeding to the next stage of the process. Only once all questions have been resolved will they be able to move to step 3 and sign the informed consent. Participants can sign the consent form with its Me or their eID reader. After signing, participants are redirected to the page outlining the study details. Here, participants can see the date and timestamp of their signature, and they are also given the option to read the study details again, modify their consent, or withdraw their consent. Lastly, participants can customize their preferences for study updates. They can choose to be notified about interim results, final results, or both. This ensures that participants continue to stay informed about the outcomes of the study. As you can see, the platform seems to provide an interactive environment that safeguards participants' understanding and encourages them to ask questions, highlighting the advantages of an electronic informed consent form.
Okay, so that was everything for me. I will now stop sharing. And we'll now move on to the next speaker, who will guide us through what is the legal landscape for electronic informed consent, now that we have a better idea of what that actually is. So I would like to introduce Janos Meszaros, who is a postdoctoral researcher here at KU Leuven. His research focus is on AI, data protection, and medical law. And he has a particular attention to clinical trials specifically, so he has the perfect background to explain this. So thank you very much, Janos, for being here with us today, and I give you the floor.
Thank you, Alice, for the introduction and the opportunity for being here today and present the legal side of electronic informed consent. I'm Janos Meszaros, and I work here at KU Leuven with Professor Isabel Höjes on medical research, healthcare, related topics, ethical, legal ones, recently focusing more and more on AI and the digital side of it. And that is why electronic informed consent is more and more important. So I would like to go back a little to the topic of consent. What is consent in legal perspective? Consent is a legally relevant expression of will which authorizes actions that would otherwise be unlawful, for example, a medical intervention or a data processing. It's very important, as it was already highlighted by Alice today. It is not a contract, but a legal justification grounded in fundamental rights. So what does this mean in research? Basically, it operationalizes autonomy, self-determination, and human dignity, the ethical principles, which later Professor Pascal Borry will tell more. What are the legal sources of informed consent? From bird's eye, I would say international framework, EU legal framework, and national ones, the most important point of view to approach the divide of them. In international framework, for example, the Ovidio Convention. In EU legal framework, clinical trial regulations and GDPR, and the national legal frameworks in the EU show a huge variability, which I will detail on the coming slides. The core requirements, going back to the informed consent. The first one should be free, no coercion and pressure. It should be informed, which means the information should be adequate and understandable, which is a huge challenge. What is adequate? What is enough? What is too much information, and how to present it? And this is where electronic informed consent with provided multimedia information provides a huge help. And as it was discussed before with many interesting questions, competent and capacity, the mental ability to understand the risks and benefits. And there are many additional criteria by the GDPR. It has to be specific, unambiguous, and explicit for sensitive data like health data. Going by the GDPR, there are additional constraints for processing personal data. It must be separable, this consent, from other matters. It must be withdrawn as easily as it was given. For example, if it was given electronically easily, then the participant must be able to withdraw it as easily. For example, if it was electronically, we cannot require the person to has to come and give it in a traditional written form, which is much more difficult. It can be invalid in imbalanced relationships. For example, a patient-physician, which is a crucial topic and issue. So this leads to a very important issue, is that consent for research, we can call it the ethical consent, and data protection are not the same. So in the EU, there is a distinction between consent for participation in research and consent for processing the participants' personal data. As I mentioned before, in imbalanced dependent situations, for example, which can be an employer, employee, physician, patient, public authority, citizen, the situation can be very different for consent for participating in research and consent for collecting of health data, GDPR consent. For example, if it's research, then consent is required for that. But in a case of processing personal data, consent may not be the proper legal ground, since it may be not freely given. So different legal ground might be necessary for processing data, personal data. These can be many different legal grounds in GDPR, like, for example, public interest. And I would jump to the electronic side of informed consent, which is increasingly relevant in AI-driven and data-intensive medical research. I'm sure the participants here who join into this discussion today meet more and more research proposals and papers and topics about AI and electronic data processing. The European health data space is also on a way to be implemented, which has many challenges but many opportunities. And because of that, electronic informed consent is more and more relevant. But because it's electronic, the first question is what it can change legally. eConsent must be still free, informed, and given by a capable person. So this doesn't change. But it produces new legal questions, like identity verification. So who is actually consenting? Second, authenticity. Is there a consent document reliable? Integrity. Has the consent been altered, changed? Which leads to the fourth one, auditability. Can consent be proven later? These are legal validity issues, not just technical ones. That is why they are crucial, and that is why they got regulated in the EU. So before I go into the details of how electronic signatures are regulated in the EU, I would like to just simplify the situation. There is the simple electronic signatures, which can be just ticking a box. There can be advanced electronic signatures, which, for example, when you use DocuSign for signing the document. And third one, there is the qualified electronic signature, where we are using a government-issued system ID to make it the most reliable. And the details. So the legal framework for electronic signatures relies on the eIDAS regulation. This is an EU regulation. There is a big difference between regulation and directive. An EU regulation means it's applicable in all EU member states. Directive is different. In directive, the member states need to create a separate law to implement it. So this eIDAS regulation is applicable of all the member states, and it regulates electronic identification and trust services. And as I mentioned, it applies in all the member states. But there are still issues because I think you all met with the problem that GDPR is also a regulation, but still it is applied in many situations quite differently in member states. And here the issue can be similar. So the purpose of this regulation is to ensure the legal recognition of electronic signatures, and while this enable cross-border trust. So the types of electronic signatures. There is the simple one, which is a tick box with type name, which has minimal security. The second one is the advanced signature, which is uniquely linked to the signer. It identifies that person and detects any changes to the document. And third one is the qualified one. It contains all what we had in an advanced one, plus is based on a qualified certificate and created with a secure device. More in detail. So in an advanced electronic signature, first, there is an identity verification with an email or SMS code. So it's a two-factor one. The participant signs an eConsent form using a secure signing platform. Here, a DocuSign style system can be a great example. The document is after this cryptographically sealed, which means any change is detectable. So if the document is altered, the signature becomes invalid, which is a crucial part of it. And the next one, the qualified electronic signature. Here, the most important part is the identity is verified through government-issued digital identity. Participant signs using a national eID system. For example, in Belgium, this is an ITSME system. So here, the signature created also via a certified secure hardware or software. And this is the most important part of this. This is legally equivalent to a handwritten signature. So summarizing all of this, the simple one, short description, is a basic electronic identification of consent. Sorry, indication. Advanced one is a secure signature linked to a signer. Third one, qualified, certified signature with the highest security. The examples what I already mentioned. Identity check. Here, it's none or very limited at the simple one. Advanced, it's moderate. Qualified, it's strong because it's government verified one. Integrity. Simple one is limited protection. In advanced, the document is sealed, so it has a tamper detection. And the third one is fully secured and certified. The legal value, which is very important here, it's valid, can be valid, but it's a very weak evidence. The advanced one is a strong evidentiary value. And the third one is, as I mentioned, it's equivalent to a handwritten signature. The use in research, these are just examples in general. Simple can be in low-risk studies, surveys. Advanced is more common in clinical research. And third one, the qualified one, is in high-risk, high-liability context. It's also possible often. And here, I would like to highlight the issues of different level of acceptance of electronic informed consent and electronically provided information in the EU member states. In 2022, with Dr. Evelyn de Sutter and with professors Pascal Borry and Isabel Hoyes, we did a research on comparing the EU member states, how they accept the use of electronic informed consent. So in 2022, we identified three different levels, three different groups. First one, countries accepting and regulating the use of electronic informed consent. Second, countries accepting the use of electronic informed consent, but without explicitly regulating it. And third, countries that were not accepting it. But since 2022, a lot has changed. Now, currently, we don't know about a country. I don't know about a country which is not accepting electronic informed consent anymore. So the landscape now is that Historically, some member states were cautious or restrictive, but now there is a strong evidence today of no EU country explicitly banning electronically informed consent. Please, if you know any country where it's currently or temporarily forbidden, please let me know. The trend, especially after COVID and the digital trials and AI, is toward acceptance. However, restrictions are still exist, and they are more like procedural but not prohibitive. For example, they are requiring additional verification, hybrid consent, digital plus in-person, and ethics committee approval. So in practice, what actually varies across the EU member states? So instead of allowed or not allowed, the real differences are the level of regulation. If there is an explicit legal framework, or silence plus some guidance. And the type of signature required. There can be advanced signature or qualified signature required. And also ethics committee strictness is varying among the member states. In some countries, they are more permissive, while the others are more conservative in practice. Since how ethics committees work, it's not unified on the EU level. This shows a great variety, and that is why the topic of the acceptance of electronic informed consent and providing information electronically is still very important. And I'm very much looking forward to also hear from you, your opinion, your experiences, because we would be very happy to do more research about this. Thank you.
Sorry, but what did QES stand for? Qualified electronic signature or?
Exactly.
Q. Okay, thank you.
QS qualified.
Okay.
AES was advanced one, and the simple one was the first one.
Thank you, Janos. Okay, so now we move to our next presenter, with Professor Pascal Borry, who will guide us through the ethical landscape this time of eConsent. So these are two sides of the same coin. We have the legal and now we have the ethical as well. Pascal is a professor of bioethics at KU Leuven, and his research focuses mainly on the ethical, legal, and societal aspects of innovative technologies, such as eConsent. Is also a member of multiple ethics committee himself, and is currently the chair of the WADA Independent Ethics Board. Thank you very much, Pascal, for being here today and for guiding us through the ethical landscape of electronic informed consent.
Okay, thank you very much for the opportunity here to present in this session. I will build my presentation starting with some personal experiences in the domain of informed consent, moving to the already referenced PhD project of Evelyn de Sutter, where we did some studies with regard to electronic informed consent and the potential and challenges that it might bring, and then move to some recommendations based on the guidance documents that we elaborated on electronic informed consent that could help ethics committees in their evaluation of protocols using electronic informed consent. So first of all, just to comment to the topic already, and I think as relevant, I think when we come to the domain of an electronic informed consent, is the reason and the idea why we have an informed consent process. Ultimately, it's about protecting the dignity and the identity of the human beings, the interests of the participants in research. And that really remains crucial, whether the process of letting someone participate in a research project is being considered, where you have an evaluation as a study. You need to have this interest at heart of the participants. That's the core responsibility of an ethics committee, and that comes first. And informed consent process, as we know, is only a second step. Once you have evaluated the study, then you are looking at whether appropriate information can be given and whether participation is free and voluntary. And that's what we can as well see to the Oviedo Convention, what was already reported earlier. I think I work a lot in the domain of human genetics. What I see is that, consent is becoming more and more complex, certainly in that setting. And I think when you think about what do we need to tell participants that participate in research, I think the potential challenges that it brings, and in order to have a truly informed consent where you have a good comprehension, I think that becomes more and more difficult. Just a case example of consent forms in human genetics, where you have a myriad of potential choices that you need to give to participants. You have potentially secondary findings, unsolicited findings. You might ask participants whether they need to be recontacted. There might be relevant information for family members. There might be questions with regard to access to data, asking whether data can be shared, under which circumstances, questions regarding variance of non-significance. I mean, there are quite a lot of options that might be given to participants, and it's really a crucial question there, how we can increase the level of comprehensiveness, understanding, and facilitate choices. That brought me a few years ago to a question: what do we know at this moment about informed consent forms? And I think one of the things that we did with Emilia Niemek leading that work was assessing readability of informed consent forms. And I think I don't need to tell you that are involved in research evaluation that this remains, I think, even today, a big challenge. In this study, we analyzed using very simple tools. These are tools that are available in your Word processor, where you can evaluate readability of consent forms, the Flesch-Kincaid formula and the SMOC formula. I'm not an expert in these tools, but you can use them in your Word files. And if you see at standards for readability, that scales are being made, how complex language is. And we analyzed 36 forms in that study that were available online. And what we saw that despite recommendations of reading level to be at grade level 8, that of the 36 forms, none of them was readable according to the recommended standard. And I think that's already an eye-opening on the one hand. Of course, readability doesn't say a lot about comprehension, but it shows that low readability of consent forms in the study that we identified is something that is as well to be found in other contexts for medical procedures as well as in research context. So the complexity is too high, and I think it sets us to think what we can do about that. None of the forms were reaching the recommended readability level. And of course, this is a challenge. To what extent then, if they are only readable and at a quite difficult level, whether they really fulfill the intended function that we intend with an informed consent. And even if we look at studies with regard to comprehension, and I just refer you to a few studies that have been done at that level, is that we see that studies that evaluated comprehension of research participants to studies saw that, well, it is only here, and I just summarize here a quote, a study that did an evaluation of that in different studies or in a systematic review. We found that the level of comprehension regarding informed consent components, such as voluntary participation, blinding, and freedom to withdraw, which are kind of crucial concepts in research ethics, was low. being understood by only half of the patients. And this really seriously undermines the ethical foundations of current practices for obtaining consent in clinical trial, potentially also challenging the standard approach to safeguarding patients' autonomy in ordinary medical settings. So this is really, I think, globally a challenge. What do we know more about understanding is that the question, and there is been literature on that, is the question, well, how can we increase comprehension and understanding by participants? And what we see globally, and I just refer here to that study that is as well a systematic review of more than 50 interventions in a randomized controlled way to how can we improve informed consent. Well, we see globally like two elements that come forward consistently as improving the understanding of participants. First of all, improve your consent forms, make it more readable. And two, have an interaction with your participants, extend the time, but as well extend feedback, for example, integrate tools that check the understanding of participants and give feedback to participants. A third element that came maybe is more surprising is that multimedia interventions, because we see more and more sometimes videos that are being made, are definitely effective, but maybe less effective than we would expect. So there's definitely less strong impact than, for example, the more interaction, because even with multimedia, you remain more a passive participant and not an active participant. So I think globally, and I just refer you to another study that in fact kind of reports the same, is that if you integrate in your informed consent interactive mechanisms, so promoting active patient involvement and bidirectional communication, that this will increase and will give a better result at the level of comprehension than if you have a more passive participation. And of course, here I'm a bit biased with regard to studies coming from the clinical context. I think it's, to my knowledge, there are much less studies in a non-clinical context, and it might be interesting and relevant as well to look in other types of studies in general. So globally, improving understanding by identifying the key elements, making clear what is core to the study, what is less core, making sure you have as well tools to evaluate the comprehension and adapt your materials and integrate interactive components are tools to increase comprehension of participants. From there, I think the question that arose to us, and that's the PhD project of Evelien de Sutter, was the question like, well, to what extent could a tool as an electronic informed consent assist in improving the comprehension of participants to studies? And Evelien de Sutter did, in the framework of PhD, several sub-studies. She did some interviews as well here with different stakeholders, professionals, but as well regulators, ethicists, and so on. And I think a few elements that came forward, and I read to summarize very shortly a lot of work, but I think what is a potential application is first of all, electronic informed consent could increase a more personalized approach, in the sense that levels of information could be diverse, going from a concise to a more broader level of detailed information, highlighting information, and it could integrate as well a more long-term interaction. Of course, you see immediately here, I'm already integrating a few assumptions about how electronic informed consent is or might function. I will come back to that in a second. So if you have a more interactive discussion, a platform could allow for reconsenting, could allow for keeping contacts between a participant and a setting that is developing studies, could allow as well for return of results. So this, in a sense, if used well, could increase participant empowerment and could help participants with dealing with a lot of information that participants are confronted with today. As a systematic, I would say, concern in the different stakeholders that have been targeted about the use of electronic informed consent, I think there were two elements that stood out. First of all, the concerns about participants who lack digital literacy as a major concern. And a second element is that an electronic tool should not replace a personal interaction between a researcher and a research participant. It could support, it could help, but it is not the goal here to just replace an interaction. I think that's at the core as well of an informed consent process in the framework of research, is that it's all about dignity, interest, and increasing respect for autonomy of participants. And if a system would be replacing that and not empowering that, I think that would go the wrong direction. If you have a tool, of course, you can test a tool, and I just want to refer here to another study that was done. Here is an example of what you have seen already: the potential of an electronic tool to personalize the information, having more concise information, having more extensive information, allowing participants, guiding the participants to the different information, allowing a participant to as well click and say, like, well, I have understood this. These are tools that you can integrate in a platform like this. You can hear, for example, that's another example about a long-term interaction. You can see if changes are happening, if new tests or intervention are being added. I mean, these are things you could integrate in a system like that. We evaluated that demo as well in different rounds. So in order to increase the level of appreciation of the tool being used and the comprehension of the tool. And usability is something we don't often use in a context of in informed consent, but I think integrating users, I think integration of patient perspective is something that is much more emphasized. I think we don't do that enough, but and in other contexts of healthy participants, I think evaluation by users is very relevant in a regular consent, but I think in an electronic informed consent has as well the same potential and the same importance. So I think what I wanted to show, I think in the first element, is that some studies that have been done with regards to informed consent, some results that we see that low readability, low comprehension, an electronic informed consent could technically have the potential to remediate part of that if well designed. The question is more broadly, how should ethics committees look at electronic informed consent? And I think there are 4 elements that I would like to emphasize that is going a bit further than the comprehension. I think a first element, I think that we need to look at as ethics committees, of course, is to what extent is an informed consent assisting a participant to make a decision? Is it sufficiently clear? Is it sufficiently informed? Sufficiently detailed? I don't think that evaluation is so different between a traditional informed consent and an electronic informed consent. What is probably adding to what extent is the question, how will this electronic informed consent being used? And to what extent might this context having an impact as well on this comprehension? And I think it is very important to have more information about that from the researchers. We know that if you have if you have an informed consent in a research context and you have an individual interaction between a researcher and a research participant, you can be attentive to the verbal, but as well the non-verbal interaction. This means that a research participant can ask questions, can have as well a feeling about to what extent he is trusting the researcher, is trusting the research interests. On the other hand, researchers might more easily pick up if a participant is understanding, if a participant has a hesitancy, or if a participant is not understanding. And I think this is probably one of the crucial elements to see this broader context when evaluating a study, and to what extent the setting itself is providing or helping the research participants. So what can we do there? I think is of course having a look at the how information is being provided, having attention to what extent the information remains personalized, if it's more layered, if it's focused on the research participants, to what extent there is a clear interaction, and I think very often it can be in parallel. I mean, it can be that an electronic informed consent is used as just a kind of a tool within a physical environment. If that physical environment is not there, then there is still the question how the interaction will take place. Will there be a video call? How will participants be able to ask questions? I think that's very important to identify and to ask. And as well, how comprehension will be achieved in the different in the electronic informed consent process. And there could be quizzes integrated. There could be as well. I mean, we have seen studies where, for example, a level of understanding is necessary before you can participate into a study. I mean, these are tools that could be integrated easily. The second element in a traditional informed consent, we know voluntariness is very important. You can only participate in research if this is happening free of any pressure, whether it's financial or other elements of other incentives that are inappropriate. And this doesn't change in the context of electronic informed consent. So we need to make sure as well, when we evaluate studies using that type of tools, that we are sure that those tools are not increasing persuasion, manipulation, nudging, or whatever that is forcing participants to participate in a study or answers questions in a certain way. And we need as well to be attentive about the future recruitment in future studies. So that it is clear is that if the goal, for example, is to ask questions, whether the request for future participation, that this should be very clear in the interaction that is there, that people are giving their consent to be contacted for future studies. The third element is the decision-making capacity in a consent form or in a consent process. Of course, we need to make sure that a participant is able to provide consent, has the decision-making capacity, sometimes even as well the age. I will not go into much detail here on that. Comes a bit with my fourth point, but it is indeed that decision-making capacity in an electronic context might become more difficult. Can we assess, and how can we as ethics committee then assess whether researchers are attentive to that point, that participants can be presumed to have the decision-making capacity? And as well, I think the social environment and the social support can be very important. In a regular context, we can see or identify if a certain study might bring some stress, or whether a participant needs additional help, information or social support. Then there is a responsibility for a researcher to allow that. Well, I think if you have a context where there is kind of decreased interaction, then of course these elements might come more into to pressure. So I think here as well, I think a more recommendation would be like, well, to make sure that even if such tools are being used, that necessary requirements for interaction between a participant and a researcher and measures for support are still present. And then last element, I think Janos already referred to that. Of course, an electronic process brings challenges to signing a document, to identification about the identity of the person. I think, of course, there is a huge level about the type of research we are talking about, and I think that's a risk of having a more general framework. But of course, if you contact a person with a goal to participate, you want that person is being participating. And I think according to the potential level of the type of study, we might have higher levels of protection. I will not go into that. And the second element is that, well, from the moment you use digital forms as well, I mean, we have the concern if we have informed consent forms, that those are being protected if they are traditional signed forms. But I think if you have an online form, we need to make sure that those are as well are being protected from unauthorized access as for other relevant documents. And this view of this schematic overview brings somewhat together different elements that I brought at the core. So the comprehension, voluntary elements, the competence, and the signatures. I think having an electronic informed consent could technically improve the interaction, the individual participation. If an informed consent is not just a form in a digital way, I think that's probably one of the main challenges. I think the platforms that might develop might just be a digitalized version of a document you would otherwise print out. I think if we really want the electronic informed consent to be more than that, I think more investment needs to be done to make sure that you integrate other components that strengthen as well the different elements. And there, I think you will have, or researchers will have to invest more in co-design and improve the understanding as well and elements in that regard. And of course, there are different elements that play a role. I think I don't go so much into focus about the type of research might have an impact as well. And I think depending on the type of study, we can discuss more or less how the different elements would work. I just want to refer as a kind of a conclusion to a MOOC that we developed on research ethics. That MOOC is available. So a massive open online course is a course that we developed and has over the last 4 years, approximately 3,000-4,000 people have participated in that. It's freely available, so you can follow that. And what is important, and I will leave this for now, but we are in the framework of Changer. We are developing a MOOC in which there is as well a module on electronic informed consent, where you will find the guidance documents, some of knowledge clips as well. And this information will be available. I think normally we aim early July. The tool should be, the MOOC should be available. With this, I would like to thank you, and I'm open for questions.
Yes, now thank you to Pascal and the previous presenters for the electronic ICF. I wanted to know whether this, and my understanding is that it's still a trial, right, on pilot, you're piloting within the EU region, or it's something that is already in use and adopted. That's number one. Number two, whether this has been used, tested elsewhere outside of the EU region. And if so, what has been the experience or the outcome of such? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, I would first of all, what we have developed is indeed was developed in the framework of a project. This was a demo that was being made, a demo that is not operational, because what we saw was were some screenshot of something that was working on a website, but doesn't have the backbone in the back. So there was no kind of database behind making it not operational. So there is a technical backbone that has been developed on paper, but has not been developed as a tool. However, there are electronic consent tools available on the market, very often developed by pharmaceutical companies in the context of clinical trials. This helps as well to, for example, upload signed consent forms as an additional tool. It doesn't need to be completely digital. In the context of COVID as well, some electronic informed consent mechanisms has been used. So there are tools available. To my knowledge, I don't think we have a lot of studies exploring, for example, how participants reacted to that, the impact, the level of comprehension, the level of understanding, whether kind of evaluating the advantages of these advantages. I don't think we have a lot of information on that from real life studies, I'm afraid.
May I ask something, please?
Sure.
Is there any knowledge about electronic withdrawal from clinical trials via electronic forms? That's one. And the other is there any use of bots, conversation with the bot while a person is negotiating, participating in a clinical trial?
Yeah, no, good questions. Because this brings really the crucial element of how ethics principles might work in practice when using such a tool. I think I don't have I don't have information on this with regard to withdrawal. I think, of course, you will certainly, if you talk about clinical trials, that's already a very specific setting. Then there's clearly a context where you would have interactions, I hope, with the clinical investigators, with the researchers. I hope in that context that withdrawal would not just be electronic, would as well be linked as well to the real interaction that is still available. And the other element, I don't have so much information on the use of all kinds of bots, but of course it is happening. And what I'm aware of, for example, as a context where we did some research, is that there are quite a lot of apps, for example, and a lot of research related apps that are collecting health information, presenting it as a study. Sometimes as well with bots responding to questions, and brings, of course, quite a lot of issues as well, and questions to what extent information is correct. And very often this is in a research setting, not really operational. But we know as well there are some, I think if you follow some media and we have seen, of course, studies, not studies, but apps responding or websites responding and giving all kind of psychosocial help by bots, bringing a lot of questions about the real value of that and potential problems of that.
Thank you.
Jane?
Oh, hello there. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, hi, and thank you so much for an excellent presentation. It was really, really good. I run an organisation called Please Read Carefully, which specialises in lay language communications, and I'm really interested in what you had to say about eConsent. And I'm also wondering, with paediatric clinical trials, with regards to their samples, when they come to the age of maturity in their country, they will have to give informed consent for the processing of those samples. And I'm just wondering, do the eConsent apps track their their ages so that they can then be reconsented at a later date? Thank you ever so much.
Yeah. Well, I think it's difficult to give a generic answer because I mean, it's not that we studied specific tools about that, and then there might still be a difference between, for example, a clinical trial where you are following a pediatric population, or indeed your example that you give, which is a bit different, where you were doing a prospective cohort study where participants are providing samples, and where adults decide for their children about providing their samples. And the question about how we do, I think maybe a first element here is the question would be, is there still an ongoing relationship? I think that would be a first question. If there is an ongoing relationship, then I think it is important to bring that forward and to clearly inform, like, we are storing this, we are using this for that purpose, and I think the situation allows that as well, then to inform participants about what's happening.
Mm.
If then there is not that ongoing relationship, then I think we need to find other ways about informing, and I think then it's a bit of the question in which circumstances the samples were being gathered, and I think was there a proper informed consent there, and are there other ways to inform participants? I mean, there are, of course, alternatives, for example, where the ethics committees will be providing their approval. Then there is a question about what are the best strategies to inform participants, maybe if you don't have contact details anymore. So then sometimes alternatives are being done, information on websites about study results. So there are alternatives which are not maybe the same way, but could help there. And I guess, and that's maybe the answer to your question, I think, yeah, models like that could bring maybe information, could bring information to participants in a better way. I don't think it will solve all of the questions. And maybe another issue that hasn't been solved yet, like, are we developing models for consent, or are we developing models for information? And that's as well, I think, a tension that exists. I don't think that consent is always the answer. I think but that we should work on better and proper information about what's happening in the research context. I think for sure that should be done.
Mm. So thank you. So presumably in the original consent form, the parents will need to give their consent for the child's contact details to be made available to the researchers. Is that correct? Thank you.
Yeah, but of course that's difficult. If you have let us say a newborn, I'm working a lot in the context of newborn screening. You have, for example, the newborn screening samples that are being kept for research. There is a lot of discussion there about appropriate measures and safeguards for research. Solutions that have been found sometimes are like not indeterminate storage, but rather of keeping samples for a shorter period of time, not linking it in an inappropriate way to increasing amount of information in other contexts. So yeah,
that's really helpful. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you so much for your brilliant presentations, Professor Borry. Just following up on Jane here, because her questions also made me think about vulnerable populations. Here in Portugal, we do have the requisite, it's an ethical imperative to ask for informed assent from pediatric ages up until the 16th birthday. From that point on, they have to sign the consent alongside their parents. And she just talked about things like preserving samples beyond the age of when you acquire the capacity to consent. This is so difficult now. We have so many ancient biological collections here in Portugal. How should we address For instance, new technologies like whole genome sequencing of samples that were obtained as legacy collections for informed consent and e-consent. Do you think this is a part of the answer? Albeit I'm very much with you that models for informed and dynamic consent are very capable of transmitting information rather than acquiring the manifestation of consent just because of consent fatigue and all of that, those issues that we already know. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I think it was more an addition than a real question, but I think I agree that that consent is there is more than consent and information challenges there. Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks.
Okay, thank you everyone for the presentations and the very interesting discussions. So now we're entering in the last part of our training that is more the applied ethics. So we will have a case study, and the case will be presented by Kaat, who is a PhD with us at KU Leuven. She has a background in biomedical science, and she worked as a research assistant in the iPod project, which is a project on AI and AI tools for obesity-related vascular diseases. And at the moment, she's doing a PhD on the ethics of post-mortem tissue donation. So thank you so much, Kaat, for being here and for presenting the study.
So now it will be up to you to do some practical work. So what will I be talking about? I will briefly be presenting a situation, and then the aim is for you to come up with how you would implement eConsent, or if you would implement eConsent in the situation. This will be done in breakout rooms, and then afterwards we'll come together. You will be able to discuss the solution you came up with, and then I will also be presenting what the researchers did for this specific study. So what was this study about? It was a study testing how well a full implementation plan would help 10 pediatric trauma hospitals. So it was a multi-site trial, start and use screening, short counseling, and referral to treatment for alcohol and drug use. And for that, or as part of that, they conducted an online survey with multiple stakeholders, but one of those were adolescent trauma patients, about how they experienced that specific implementation strategy, and there was also a medical record review. Now, this study was done in the context or started before COVID-19, but then COVID-19 happened. So because of the lockdowns, it was no longer possible to have the adolescent and the parental or the adolescent essence and the parental consent in real life. So in that situation, they had to switch to eConsent. So that's the case you will also be discussing now in the breakout.
Okay, so I think now we'll move to the breakout rooms. And then you will receive more detailed information about how to move forward with the discussion in the breakout rooms.
But I agree with you for the parental consent. And I'm not sure myself, but I was thinking about the Belgian system with the It's Me. I don't know. I never saw that before in another country. So I don't know if you have this type of system in your own country. Joanna, yes, you have.
In Spain, we have like it's like a certificate that it's provided by the
government,
by a ministry, by the government. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So it's I think it's a powerful tool, and I was wondering if someone has minors, children. I don't know how it works, actually. I don't know if they have their children on their It's Me app, and then they can give the consent for their children. I don't know. I'm wondering. Because it's written, so the context says that they need the parental consent as well. So
they need the parent consent when they are 16 above for this type of research, because it depends on the country. I think in Spain, for this type of survey, it's not totally clear to me that they need the consent from the parents. Below 16 for sure, but from 16 above, which I guess is the ones that are more called to this type of project, no, drug and alcohol abuse. I mean, of course, there are kids 12 that also are in, but so I don't know if for 16 and above they need the consent from the parents. I think it's not needed here.
Yeah, I think it depends on
they
the
can
country.
go directly with the consent from the adolescents in that case.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And of course,
I think, No, please go ahead.
Now, of course, with a topic like this, there's a lot of ethical issues and a lot of things at stake. The fact that maybe adolescents won't be honest about their answers, and the fact that their parents are involved, or maybe it's maybe something that goes against honest answers, I would say.
Yeah, exactly. I think the eConsent here is not the big problem. I think it's really in the end, how you guarantee that the kids are responding honestly, and how you guarantee their privacy against their parents. Of course, if you are 12, it's different. If you are 17, it's totally different. The situation is totally different.
Yes.
And because this requires really sitting down with the participants and explaining clearly how the information will be shared. This is important. This is crucial here. So eConsent, it's not eConsent per se. It's the situation that you cannot explain exactly how this is going to happen, or you need to develop really a good material to explain clearly how the information will be shared.
And what do you think about a video call then?
Video call, it's okay. In the end, this is an issue of resources. It's time, so someone needs to do that. If you have the resource, it's fantastic.
Yeah, but because this happened during the COVID lockdown, so at the end of these breakout rooms, someone will give the summary of what we discussed, and Kaat is going to present what they decided to do in that case, because it was...
this is real. This happens.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
So just to move on a little bit and try to focus on the eConsent, because I know you are ethics reviewers, so you see a lot of ethical issues, but I'm going to try to focus on the topic of today. So do you think that the COVID-19 emergency would justify prioritizing medical research over adolescents' rights to autonomy?
No.
It's a bit provocative, I think.
No, in this type of research. I mean, if you are doing research related to the pandemic, it's different. You can discuss. It's not that because it's a pandemic, you can do whatever you want, but it's justified. But studying drug abuse or alcohol abuse, well, yeah, because they are adolescents and maybe the lockdown, causes some kind of things. But I don't think, the lockdown was 2 months. You can wait. So it's not, no, I don't think so. I don't know why others think, but...
Any others views?
Well, about the number of participants needed, regardless of country regulations, practices, in statistics, if we are doing a basic t-test, for example, we want to exceed 30.
Yeah.
So that's more a statistical fact rather than regulations, etc. And about the consent, because there is a traumatic situation experienced not only by the victims but their parents as well. So again, keeping privacy's identity, not revealing identity in the research should be assured priorly. But I don't know whether the victims can value or understand that. They have the capability to understand it. So when there is such a situation, we turn to other ways. As researchers, can we obtain this information from other ways rather than harming the participants?
Yeah.
Because their emotional state is very fragile. So that it can change throughout the experiment, not just at consent stage.
Yeah.
So rather than harming them, can we do it in another ways is the best alternative, I think.
So some of you said that actually you won't use electronic informed consent, but again, in this context, there is not so many options. So this context help us to think about it and try to find ways, because if this study is really needed for whatever reason, we can try to find an electronic informed consent, because as we saw in the lecture, there is many ways, there is many media also that you can use, video call, and you can display the information on a video or different things like that. I was also wondering, would you recommend co-designing the electronic informed consent with participants and their parents? What do you think about that? And can you think of some measures to improve the comprehension?
We always do that. We always co-design the informed consents with the participants, usually. Well, depending. I mean, if it's just a very easy survey, it's not the case. But when it's a study that really requires quite an implication of the participants, we try to do this always. But for me, this is not an issue of the e-consent, it's an issue of consent. So the form per se, not because it's online or not. I think it's, I mean, of course, the e-consent issue basically, it requires an extra effort to make things very clear. This is the main issue. And it requires an extra effort to ensure that the one that it's consent is the one that it's responding. Basically, for me, these are the two big challenges of e-consent. So probably. So, but I think it's a good practice, or when there is a study that really requires quite an involvement of the participant, I think it's good practice to at least first test with 2-3 participants or potential participants or people that it's in patients, communities or associations, or to really ask them to check if everything is clear.
Yeah, pilot study may be necessary.
Yeah. Any other thoughts? Also, Hélène, I don't know if you can talk, or please feel free if you can talk to unmute. Yeah.
Yes, I mentioned in the chat that I would definitely recommend co-designing, especially in the COVID lockdown situation, because of the nature of the research. And I think it would also be recommended. So I definitely agree with what Joanna and Semra said about piloting.
Yes.
So that might take some time, but I think it will help you with the inclusions, and also it can help you to ask the potential participants what kind of questions they might have about the sensitive nature of the project. So I think I would recommend it for several reasons.
Yeah. What do you think about the platform that was shown? So only in Dutch at the moment.
Up till now, I'm not familiar with it. I'm definitely very interested. So I would definitely like to have more information about it, because I think it can be very useful.
Yeah. Yeah, it sounds, it looks very interactive to me as well, with different topics, and you can click on it, you can open a new tab maybe to have more information, and tell the researchers if something is not clear, and ask questions in the chat, or maybe with video calls. So I don't know if you have any remarks on that platform. If you see some improvements or something that you really liked.
And participants may think that once they give their consent, they have to answer all questions. So there can be an alternative or explanation. They may skip some questions if they see it's very confidential, or if they don't want to answer. So sometimes online surveys, if you leave something blank, you can't proceed to the next page. So this should not be used. So they should be given freedom to skip, not answer questions they don't want to.
I was mentioning the platform to give the electronic informed consent, so to give the signature, and before you can give the signature. So this is the step before completing the survey. I'm really talking about the informed consent. So Alice showed a demo, a demonstration on the website, and what I was talking about with question is that every time you click on an information topic, you can always leave a question to the researchers team. Obviously, they don't have to. They can say, I understood everything, but they have this option. And at the end of completing and reading all the information on the platform, they can also request a video call. Do you think, is it enough? What do you think?
Have you already tested the platform in real?
No, I'm
just curious to know how it works, because it's super that people can leave comments and ask, but I don't know how feasible it is then to manage.
Yeah, I think it's so I'm not a specialist on electronic informed consent. I'm part of the Changer project as the organoid. I work on organoids, but
we don't know about that.
Yes, but I guess it's really relevant to test it, and again to do a pilot testing, try to see what needs to be improved. For sure. Katalin, you wanted to say something?
So, I want to say something about the testing. I guess a good test would be that all of us from this, not this small meeting, but for the whole list, we should run a beta test, on that. I'm really interested on that platform, and I'll be glad to to provide my review on that one.
Nice. Yeah, I don't know your contact with the Changer project, but please feel free to reach out to us, maybe by email or something like that. I'm sure my colleagues will be very interested.
Because my background is in engineering as well, so ethics, engineering is one way, and ethics is the second way. So it's the other way. So that's why I have quite some experience in either technical things and on ethics. So I'm sure that I would have something to say to add.
That's really nice.
So
okay.
should I type on so that's the link.
I think Faye sent this in every breakout room, but I'm sure you can find the contact emails on the website. Yes, we will also publish a MOOC. I don't know if you know that already, but so the Changer project is creating a MOOC, so a massive open online course, so on a website, and you can register for it. And so 4 different topics will be discussed. So electronic informed consent, organoids, AI, and gene editing. So this will be published in a few months, I think. So I wanted to reply to Semra. I think it was you who mentioned this idea, but indeed we can also maybe try to quiz the participants, which means like to test their understanding of the information displayed on the website. That's also an option to ask some question to make sure that they really understood what they just read. Did you have this type of design in, like, did you already saw this type of design in your protocol reviews or in the past?
No.
No.
No. But no, I worked with adolescents, business people, so this is very extraordinary.
Yeah. So it's not that common, I guess.
No. But since this is a health-related issue, when we organize a video meeting, for example, the psychology of individuals is that when there's a person wearing white dresses, they used to obey them without questioning it, view them as an authority. So
yes,
this undermines the value of consent. So you just obey it. This may not be true consent.
Yes.
So that should be also considered.
Yeah, I would say this is true for every participant, I think, in any study, but maybe yes, specifically here with this vulnerable population. I had a last question, but I think we already kind of talk about it. So if you have to design an eConsent for this case, what would you do? What would you consider and what would it look like?
Yeah, if I may, I think in this case, as we have been discussing here, so just answering a survey is not really, I mean, a survey can be quite intrusive, but having said that, it's not a big issue here. What I think it's very important here is to be very clear about the privacy of the responses, how this will be shared. And if it will be shared with the parents, no problem, but you need to explain clearly that to the participants, to the teenagers, to the adolescents.
Yes.
So for me, this is very important. Very clear, and this is very difficult for the kids to understand how it works. So you need to be very clear and adapt the language to that.
I guess sharing, I mean, this area of sharing with the parents will drop down the number of the persons being willing to fill up the
basically
the answers. So I'm thinking to my kids, so if my daughter will have to choose, should I share with your dad or mom about something? Basically, I think that probably she will say yes, but I don't know how probably she will balance and depending on the question about her privacy things, woman things or whatever. So it's difficult to if I put on their shoes, so moving backward, like when I was 14, 16. It's very difficult. I mean, I wouldn't agree to share with my parents. I don't know. So don't think that I was a bad kid. I'm just saying.
Yes.
I don't know. Because now, yeah, it's difficult. So at the same time, I don't know if it's difficult not to share with the parents something. Depends on the impact on the kids' health, security, and so on.
And maybe because they are traumatic kids, giving all information or you presented it as issue of flooding. Instead, we can use repeated informed consent. So there will be many discussions.
Yes.
Where they give over and over, repeatedly, they give
a continuous.
consent. So that may be good.
Yeah.
They may give up, or they may not understand when we give all information in advance.
Yes.
So we can do it in parts, maybe.
Is everyone in the breakout room now? I think so, right? Okay. So the aim is now to think a bit about how you would approach the situation I just discussed, and for that it would also, but maybe one of us, of the moderators, can do that, is to take some notes of what you come up with. I will take some notes maybe. Okay. So then, I leave the floor to you. Maybe
I can start
just
to open the floor maybe for discussion, and maybe it's more an informative question and or reflection on it. Do you know if just a little bit information about the study itself? So it is every adolescent or that is coming to the hospital is getting the same question. Is that correct? I mean, it's the same procedure.
Yeah, so they come to the hospital, and it's actually the implementation strategy, or the thing that they're trying to implement is a strategy to make sure that, also adolescent patients are really screened for the possibility of alcohol and drug use. And then I think a month after discharge from the hospital, the adolescent patients get a questionnaire, of course, if they consented beforehand, and to ask about how they experienced that process. Yes. Yeah, you can just talk. You don't have to raise a hand.
Maybe just before we go to the discussion, Tina, we should have a reporter that is sitting saying something to the plenary. Maybe it's good to have that clear who will be doing that.
I can do that if you want.
Yeah, perfect.
So thank you for hi everybody. I would like to ask, so these adolescents have been patients in the hospital, and then they are discharged, and at what time point has their consent been obtained for participating in the questionnaires? Has it been obtained during their stay at the hospital, or are they receiving a questionnaire later on and then they have to consent for the first time? That was not very clear to me.
So they receive the questionnaire later, but I believe when they are still in the hospital, the patient itself is asked whether they would be open to participating, and of course the parent as well, because it's adolescent patients. And then pre-COVID, the consent process also happened at that point. And then, afterwards, after a month, they got the questionnaire.
So what we have to discuss is whether eConsent would be applicable and feasible and practical in this kind of situation.
Yeah, and how you would approach that in practice.
Yeah. If I can say one thing about authenticity. So in this case, it may be easier because the people who are approached for this research, the adolescents, have already been known in the hospital setting. So it's not like addressing the research to people who are not known already, and then we don't know if it's a teenager appearing as an adult. I suppose in this case their identity is already known beforehand. So maybe this is one factor that makes the authenticity issue simpler.
So their identity is already known, and also before they fill in the questionnaire, they are also asked about their birthday and the contact information that they gave beforehand to double check that it's the right person filling in the survey.
Maybe one element that is could be relevant as well. It's of course a vulnerable group in that sense. I think we could put it in that category, and whether it's electronic or not, I don't think it matters so much. But I think it is a question how we deal with that and what the consequences are of that. So you have a vulnerable group anyway that is coming to your hospital. A group as well that maybe is as well in thinking about standard of care and treatment might not be very willing as well to participate, depending on if they recognize their state of disease. So I'm not sure if that has an impact on the follow-up as well, because I mean, if they and I'm just thinking as well about representativity of the results. If you have a lot of dropouts, for example, this might have a big bias on the results. So I'm thinking as well on that element. But as well, I think we need to think a lot about the context of care and the kind of the social support they might need. I think, of course, we need to balance, and I think that's the interesting element, is that you refer to the context of COVID-19, where at a certain moment there was no other option. So it was that, or maybe so there is an importance as well, societally wise, maybe to perform that study. The question is this going in a certain way against potential interest of the participants or the minors? I think that's would be my question, and that's something we of course should not be undermined in one way or another. So at the level of the understanding, the approval, but as well, I think even more important, the social support, what kind of impact does the study create, and if you can do that in a controlled environment versus a non-controlled, might be a big difference.
Are there some other ethical issues someone sees, or potential ethical issues?
Well, I think one issue is whether this. I would agree with Pascal that the ethical issues are more important in this case because the legal issues are simpler, in my view. They do exist, but they are simpler because it's an already known group. But the ethical issues, as Pascal said, are numerous, and this is where our attention might be needed. And another thing is whether in their this, let's say, second communication with the researchers, they might reveal something, they might disclose something that has already happened since they have been treated for different kind of problems like abuse and things like that. So one thing would be how to address potential adverse events and disclosures of some things that should be handled with care by the research team, and whether the research team has a strategy for addressing this kind of revelations by the participants.
Yeah, maybe another thing as well is and I haven't seen a lot of this functioning. I think electronic informed consent is very often developed with an mature adult in mind. And if the moment you have more adolescents, then it's maybe you have the legal issues as well, but you have to what extent I'm thinking about, we don't know a lot about the age and the inclusion criteria, but I mean, maybe you have a 13-year-old, might be the case here as well, so it might not be a 17-year-old. So it brings in questions about responsibilities of parents, responsibilities and information about the minors, and difference between consent, assent, and how to integrate that in such an operational system. So So yeah, I think it opens question. I don't have really the answers, but I think it is really a question how you deal with that, and if the system is the best to deal with that.
Well, and I would like to ask if the parents not give their consent, but the teenager does want to participate. So how does the research team address this discrepancy? Because it may be clear from the legal point of view, well, not so clear, but what happens in reality?
Mm-hmm.
And what is the age range of these the persons, the adolescents that participate in this research? I don't know if this was mentioned and I missed that.
12 to 17 years old.
Up to 17 years old.
Yeah, so 12 till 17.
Yeah. So if a 17-year-old does want to participate in the research, but the parents do not give their consent.
Yeah, there might be maybe differences from country to country,
Yeah.
whether it's considered to be a clinical trial, yes or not, or a clinical study. I mean, in our system, if it's not a clinical trial, we allow minors from the years of 16 to decide themselves about participation in a study. So I think that's as well and something that might be interesting, where legal and ethical approaches might differ.
But if it's not a clinical study, is this a clinical study?
Well, it might be a clinical study, but I don't think it's a clinical trial. So then our law in Belgium, our law on human experimentation, I mean, I think there they would consider, based on general approaches to competence, that minors, if they are considered to be competent, can decide on their own whether or not to participate, and parents don't need to be informed.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anyone else who wants to add to that? And then maybe another question is, so they decided to use eConsent in a specific context. Would you recommend co-designing the consent with the parents and the adolescents?
Beforehand, you mean? Before,
yeah, before implementing it, yeah.
Yes.
I think it's useful. I'm just thinking about and whether they are minors or not. I'm thinking about patient perspectives that can really improve information provision and consents. So I think it is an addition. I mean, I think it can be a very a good strength to do that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think we should also diversify given the age range, because you cannot have the same kind of consent form to a 12-year-old and to a 17-year-old. So if these were in a written form, I would say that we need two different kind of templates regarding the age range. Certainly, they cannot have one kind of assent form for all teenage participants. For the parents, it could be the same, but for the adolescents, it would have to be different. I don't know if Pascal agrees with that.
No, I agree. Absolutely. Yeah.
Quickly summarizing what we've said so far.
Yeah.
So I think an important thing that we already said is that a lot would depend on the age of the adolescents, so whether they are more towards 12, more towards being an adult, and that age range also gives how do I say this? that like if a 17-year-old, then maybe in that case we would not need the parental assent, just the consent, and that also the consent form should be diversified based on the age. I think that's what we've said so far, and that's the focus should not be on whether electronic consent or not would be a good approach, but really on the adolescents and how they can be as informed as possible.
Yeah, but maybe as well the consideration of the potential vulnerability, the need for social support, the strategy to deal with adverse events if you get information that is inappropriate. I mean, which is showing a certain vulnerability of concern. Yeah, good. Then we can go back to the main room, I think, or not.
Yeah. And also the issue of providing the information in a way that they can really comprehend the information. The comprehension issue.
Okay. I think then we can go back to the main room. Okay.
We should leave the room, or how does it work? I guess so. I guess we just need to leave the room on the bottom right, because is everyone doing that? Then we go back to the main room.
So welcome in the breakout room. Before we start, so the point is that we make or have a discussion on the case and discuss the points that we saw in the lectures earlier that might be of high relevance in this case. And if we would have to review this case as an ethics committee, what kind of issues do you see, and do you think that researchers should consider? But first of all, we would need to have a representative that will take notes and report back the discussion to the plenary. So who would be a volunteer? Would like to volunteer?
It's typical of grown-ups. No one volunteers, but yeah, thank you, Vicky, for doing this.
I could do it, yeah.
So as a starting question, what were the most ethical issues or things that you come up with?
Let me ask, actually, because English is not my mother tongue, I have to admit that I didn't get the full scope of the details. So here is a research done with paperwork. Informed consent was on paper, but it had to be stopped.
Yes.
But didn't they already have the informed consent, or is it just recruitment?
I guess it was a continuous recruitment over a longer period of time. So I assume that there have been new people enrolling in the study while before COVID, and probably after COVID as well. And then they had to indeed switch the consent form to an eConsent.
So basically, we're talking about new recruitments that need to sign for the two things: medical details of those adolescent groups and the conversation and the interview and like interviews. Okay. Another question was ages. What is the age of adolescent? I don't know. What is adolescent? What age?
So in the paper, they talk about people that were included between 10 and 17 years old.
Got it. Thank you so very much.
No problem.
And if I may, just to help the discussion, we can even discuss whether an e-consent is justifiable in the first place before we go on to talk about the details. So do you see that such a case is a case that needs, or that informed consent is a solution due to the COVID-19 pandemic? So we have to even question this as a starting base.
What is this? We've seen this.
Yeah, so someone in the chat asked to share the slide with this case scenario again for their information. So I'm just putting it out here so
Thank
you can see it at all times.
Okay, thank you. So the question is not whether it's not like bringing it to ethics committee asking if this is ethically valid research, but the question is.
I'm not hearing her anymore. I'm not sure if I'm the only one.
No, Ilana is frozen for some reason.
Shifting in format of consent. Oh, okay, so what is the ethical?
We can hear you now, Ilana. I think that there is just
Thank you so very much. Yeah, well,
a small delay.
Yeah, we have wind. So are we talking about shifting into it? It's ethically validated because ethics committee already discussed it. It's an okay research, but we need to discuss the ethical validation of the new format, right?
Yes, and we have to consider here as well the population, the context, to what extent it's appropriate to use eConsent in this case. What kind of concerns that we saw earlier are of high relevance here. Elements that the researchers involved in the study really should put high attention to.
Yeah, sorry, Janine here. I'm just and thank you for putting the slide. It helps. I guess the question as well to inform us as the participant, what are the questions asked to us to be able to discuss? So that I don't know if there's a slide with those questions so that it's also shared. Then while people are discussing, they have the question in front of them, they're engaging as well because now many people say this, so I'm confused exactly. What is the question that we need to discuss? What is, for this particular exercise? Is it the consent form, the format for a consent form that is required or could be possibly used in this particular context? Or what is it? Or looking at the entire scenario, what is, relevant as far as, what will be ethically correct or not? So I'm a bit confused. So that's what I'm saying. If there is a way that this question are kind of written, then it's in front of us. Maybe the question will be more seeking clarity if they're not well phrased or because I got so many questions, so I don't know which one is our focus now. Sorry for that.
Yeah, I think it's a bit of an open question. So it's a matter of thinking about, okay, so in the context. So I think the context here is important, the study population, to what extent that it's ethically okay to have this e-consent in this case, and what elements, considering the specific case, are important for researchers to consider when they want to use or apply this kind of e-consent. So what are the ethical issues and or difficulties raised by this situation? Do you think that e-consent would be an appropriate option in this case? Why? What could be advantages or disadvantages?
Yeah, no, thank you. I think it's clear now. Just to add again another element for clarity. When we talk about e-consent, are we referring to the tool that we have been, that has been shared now, or the different existing tools of format of e-consent? Because e-consent can be audio recorded, or it could be an electronic tool like what we saw. So which one are we referring to? Or it's open, you can imagine one type of consent form, e-consent form, and thereafter discuss the advantage and disadvantage of its application in this particular context. So which one in
Yes.
context of this
So-
tool that you see now that Professor Pascal, I guess, or the other guy before him presented, or the different ways of using eConsent form that not necessarily digital, but could
Yes.
be, yeah.
So I think it's open. I think we can consider all because I think eConsent forms can have different formats. So I think we can consider everything, but also maybe decide upon ourselves. Okay, what would be most appropriate from what we've heard? Yeah.
Okay. So may I please tell you upfront what really bothers me? Again, it's too vague. So let me just jump in and suggest that what really bothers me is the fact that if a kid was interviewed regarding issues of behaviors, that's alcohol and drug use, probably in the beginning, his parental consent was very obvious. So I think one of the most important things, important things that bothers me is the fact that authentication and parental guidance, and like in a letter for the younger ones, and as they grow older, maybe less of parental, how would I say this? Not involvement, but at least chaperoning is important. So I don't think it should be the same for all age groups, but recruitment and interviewing, electronically interviewing, and assessing medical records should be followed with parental chaperoning and agreements, and it should be validated. That is, John cannot be sitting in his room with his girlfriend, who is the same age or maybe younger, signing in or something like this. So the technical platform should be very, very good all over the place, and parental chaperoning should be validated too. The other thing is that I have an issue with using medical records in any way in this kind of research. So I would suggest, because we are talking on a plague time, going into medical records should wait until the COVID will die out, be finished, and only then parents and children at age, adolescent at age, now they're becoming 18 and maybe 19, then they can re-sign for that process. So authentication, I think, is the most important. For me right now, is that in terms of validity is the most important thing. But, that's a hunch. Thank you.
Anyone else who wants to add on these concerns raised by Ilana?
If I may, I'm not entirely in agreement with the fact that, research should be somehow stopped or put at hold due to a pandemic or, in any other crisis situation. I mean that we have to find alternative ways that serve the same objectives and somehow respect the same principles and still be able to continue with research, because it's actually important to do so. That's an issue. I don't know, Ilana, if you...
Vicky, I absolutely agree. And I was kind of reluctant to say it up front, but this is a step that you can't go back after doing it. And I think that in time of general stress, and we all remember what happened, and I live in an environment of stress, in time of immediate acute stress, I would morally suggest a little bit of hesitation, But Vicky, to tell you the truth, I'm not happy with what I said too. In terms of authentication, yes, I'm sure about, because it's a shift. But somehow I think being careful in things that cannot be redone in times of stress is also important. But yes, I absolutely agree. And thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, it's Jane here. I'm so sorry I missed the beginning because my internet kept cutting out. But what sort of struck me sort of at the very beginning of my thoughts was that presumably this is mixing research with treatment. And I think there needs to be a clear distinction between the two, because the testing is looking at an implementation plan. So presumably you're going to be using, I say using advisedly, involving adolescent patients with presumably, if it's a trauma center, these patients might have been brought in with an overdose. So I'm really concerned about this, and also the fact that it's an online survey, and so you're going to be possibly re-traumatizing the adolescent trauma patients, and I would want to know how they're going to be supported through the study. If it's just an online survey, I don't know how long that's going to take, and also presumably the on adolescents are notoriously difficult to communicate with and to express their views. So to do this during a lockdown is a bit of a nightmare. So eConsent is a good idea, but absolutely we'll need adolescent assent, which by the way is ASSENT. But I'm guessing, so how will these kids be contacted in the first place? That's my question as well. Thank you.
I see Robert has a question.
It's not really a question, it's just a few observations, particularly on the presentation by Pascal Borry, which I found very useful.
Absolutely.
If we're discussing the acceptability of electronic informed consent forms, I think he had some very important points to make from the study of the implementation of these elsewhere. For instance, the readability of these electronic consent forms was a big problem. Secondly, the comprehension of these was also a big problem. Both, I guess, could be addressed, but the main conclusion from these studies was that we should not be replacing human-human interaction with human-robot interaction.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Now, I hope that would be the case, in which case, why is it necessary to introduce electronic forms at all if we don't intend to decrease the human-human interaction? I think that's my main conclusion from the presentations today. You've got to be very kind to your participants, otherwise there is no study. Expecting them to indulge in two-factor authentication, perhaps addressing their questions through an FAQ box, frequently asked questions box, which my experience are never satisfactory. All of these things seem to me to act as barriers to the participation of potential participants. These are all negative aspects. I'm sorry, but that my overall impression is that this is not really a wonderful advance. So please tell me I'm wrong.
Yeah, I agree.
Boris, would you consider a request or a demand from the ethics committee that those who will be recruited via an electronic process will also be followed through the research with one-on-one conversation with a researcher?
Yeah,
Will
that's
this
quite a good idea. Yeah.
will this be like something that will reduce the pressure of those young people and maybe their parents too?
Yes, perhaps, but again, I don't think conducting these conversations through Zoom is a wonderful idea. I mean, we can see that it's not completely reliable. You were cut off, Alana, just a few minutes ago. There are various problems with Zoom. In general, the ethics experts who attend Brussels don't want to do this process through this ethical evaluation via Zoom. They want to do it face to face in Brussels. I think the same thing should apply to clinical studies or whatever. You know, if you're involving participants, you got to be kind to them. And your question about withdrawal, just I'm doctoring around from one topic to another. Your question of withdrawal electronically, is that going to be carefree? In my experience, interacting with a robot is never carefree. My other problem with this is I don't think any data is secure nowadays. My staff university's data has been hacked. My pension scheme's data has all been hacked. I think my bank data has been hacked. I don't think you can trust any electronic storage facility anymore. So again, I don't think you want to put off participants. You want to encourage them, be nice to them. I know different intermediacy of the electronic form is being nice to them. Maybe I'm wrong. Another thing, I guess, is because I'm of an age where I may be one of the participants in a clinical trial myself, I don't want to be put off by two-factor authentication and then grappling with all the other horrors involved in managing an electronic form. It would discourage me from participating in a clinical trial.
Janine,
Am
I
I
see
wrong?
you have your hand up for a while already. You have something to add on that?
Yeah, thanks. Is it Feandra? Am I pronouncing your name correctly?
Phaedra, but that's okay.
Feedra. Okay. Yeah, no, very interesting comment, discussions from colleagues. And I think that I believe that would always make ethics a little bit interesting because of different perspective. But coming back to what has been shared, I think looking at the now and where we're going for, I mean, where we are going, whether we like it or not, leveraging on a digital platform, it's something that is a reality. I think what we need to look at is how best do we mitigate the risk, avoiding the hacking and everything. How do we minimize? We might completely not remove and it's right for people to, like what the previous speaker just said, I mean, the trust, whether there will be that confidentiality, the data will be safe and so on. And there is also an issue of a demographic here. It might be appealing to a certain, age group to have actually in an electronic to use a digital platform, such as an e-consent and so on. So, and might be another, age group that might not be really interested, given on various reasons particular reason that they have. So for this particular case, authentication for me, I think I agree 100%. It has to be there in any form of e-consent. there had to be a measure of authentication, and then also a kind of a hybrid where you do administer. I think it's Elena who mentioned to say, well, should you, in the recruitment process, you use your eConsent form, but at one point, it's another step where you will have that human interaction face to face with the participant. For me, I think that is core authentication, and having a hybrid kind of model where you have a kind of online tool, but at the same time giving a provision of having that human interaction. And I think that for me will be important. And again, what is not clear is if it's during treatment, if it's for research purpose, where it does not have any link to treatment, I guess the consent will be a little bit different because
Exactly.
you're not looking at the same thing. A research that does not have any impediment on the treatment, because the ethical concern for a patient on treatment is totally different in terms of what you'll be looking at compared to just being a participant who is, a participant who meets the criteria to participate in an online survey, but not necessarily, linking to the treatment. So I think that is also a little bit blur for me to be for us to be able to decide what measures of electronic or e-consent, informed consent platform to use, because they had to be distinct. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I have also a question. So we've been talking about the importance of the human conversation, and that it's important to have that, and that we were not satisfied with consultations, add-on consultations via Zoom or anything. But I was wondering, considering we are talking in the case of COVID-19 and the fact that people are really living in lockdown, do we want to put these participants as well at risks of getting COVID on top of the trauma that they are experiencing? Is it also something that we should consider, or how should we go about that?
Well, are you referring that if is a Zoom? I don't know. During I conducted a study during the COVID-19, and we had to use its Zoom platform to do interviews, even to administer the informed consent. Although it's different, was quite more of the resource very, very minimal, and the group here, it was more adult. It was quite different. However, it was completely a new thing, and one had to be innovative enough. And some countries had some measures. If it required for you to meet the participant, then there were criteria for protection, for infection control that the researcher needed to fulfill. So I don't think during COVID there was no contact at all. You could still make contact because we still treated patients and be there, but I guess for the research purpose in this case, you can still make provision for that human interaction, provided that you follow the requirement put in place for infection control, like this case of COVID-19. Because we did that in South Africa. I'm talking from South Africa, Stellenbosch University. We did at one point where we had to, but there was a specific requirement that was given where researchers needed to adhere. So we combined it to given the circumstance. Thank you.
Anyone that wants to add something to that?
I have another point to raise and leave it there for discussion. Especially during the pandemic, there were people that actually needed some help, counseling, and even possibly referral to a clinic. And they didn't actually have easy access to such services exactly because of the pandemic. So we should also see the other side here. of people really wanted to have access to counseling, etc., and not really being able to due to lockdown. So would electronic informed consent in that case be at least a starting solution if we also follow the hybrid approach that has been discussed? I mean, wouldn't it be unethical for them not to have access to such services even through an electronic manner?
I accept this.
Jan, I see you also have your hand up.
Thank you. I'm just wondering if the two issues are slightly conflated, because it's not consent to the treatment, it's consent to a survey about the treatment they've already had. So my big concern is re-traumatization, and that in the consent form that they should be reassured that they will have access to counselling. It says short counselling here, but presumably the counselling will need to be as long as a young person needs it. And these are very vulnerable young people. And I totally agree with what Robert said about the need for the informed consent to be very clear,
Absolutely.
very so that they understand key principles about confidentiality, because these kids might just be, as you say, alone in their bedroom, filling out these forms. And I would also suggest that the consent form also includes some kind of access for further follow-up if they need it. I think there should be transparency between the parents and the adolescent, although notoriously their relationships are likely to be difficult. But there's also something called, I think it's called, I can't remember exactly, but the emancipated minors, that's right. So there are
But that's
some
so much older, isn't
yes,
it?
so they would be teenagers, but they might be, for example, I don't know, in a gypsy colony, or they might be in a young offenders institute, in which case you wouldn't be able to get parental consent necessarily. So I think the consent needs to be broader than parental consent. Should also include the legal guardian consent.
But that's
And I would suggest that it's in staged consent, because these are very sensitive issues. So you could maybe perhaps have a couple of interviews online, and just to really gain their trust, so that they can talk about their experience in a way. But whether they would agree to have their medical records reviewed, I'm not sure. I think that's a huge ethical issue, and I agree with Robert about that. So those are my thoughts. Thank you.
Okay, maybe we can start before going into what actually happened in the case. Maybe if the one person, a relator from each group, can in just 5 minutes very quickly just say what were the main points discussed and the main conclusions. We start with group one. It's easier to go in order.
Group one was the breakout room I led it, or?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
So it's us, group one. Okay, thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Joanna. So basically, we discussed, I don't know if, I guess everyone has discussed the same topic, haven't? So the adolescents, okay. So basically here we discuss basically different issues. So first, the age of the kids participating. So it was not clear to us if they were 12 years old, 13 years old, or 17. So in different countries, legislations allow kids over 16 without the consent of the parents. The main issue here for us, and please, other members of the groups correct me or bring your ideas as well, is that the privacy of the responses to the questionnaires, to the survey, because you are asking kids about the use of drugs and alcohol, or the consumption behavior. So in the end, is how you're going to share this information with the parents. Is this information going to be shared? So this must be super clear to everyone. to the parents, to the kids, to the teenagers. And this is probably the most, I mean, you need to explain really well this information into the eConsent form. So it must be very clear, explain there how this is going to happen. Because it has also, it's an ethical issue, of course, how this is going to be shared. It's a privacy issue, but it's also a methodological issue. Because in the end, if you are going to tell the kid of 17 years old, this information is going to be shared with your parents, I mean, the responses will be totally, well, I guess they will not be real if there is consumption. We also discussed the need of testing or piloting the form in advance with some potential participants or regarding the age or the profile of the potential participants. Basically, in this case, because it's adolescents and it's an e-form, so it's always a good practice to pilot the consents, but because it's an e-consent, even more in that case. And what else did we mention here, colleagues? Anything else very important? I think these are the main issues that we discussed. So the need of piloting and basically how the privacy of these people will be managed. So how the information will be shared between all the people involved in the project.
Well, I guess you got the main ideas. So I wouldn't have anything else to add. I was involved in the same room, so that's why I'm taking the floor now. So I know we discussed about this. So what was the idea was about this project about the web page. In my case, I'll be glad to run a beta test on this online thing. Online, how to say? I don't find the word, but
platform.
Platform. So thank you very much. So I'll be glad to run a beta test on this online platform and to provide all my knowledge, all my thoughts on it. So, but basically, Jonna got all the things right.
Thank you very much. Now, group 2, if I'm not wrong, it's my group, so to speak. Cynthia.
Hello. So I very much rely on my colleagues to help me, but I do believe that group 2 discussed more things, but also the same as group 1. I do believe that privacy was very much a concern. We tried to group our thoughts regarding challenges and corresponding facilitators or possible answers. So and connecting the eConsent platform to the ongoing study. We tried to simulate how it would go going forward. So the first challenge that the group found was how to engage meaningfully to obtain informed consent in a remote setting, because they are cooked up because of COVID. In person is not already done. So how do we know how to interpret or missed cues regarding body language and other things that would enrich the communication regarding obtaining informed consent in the first place? Were we present before one another? The other thing was a tension between privacy and autonomy. How do we guarantee that adolescents are not being coerced to participate? How do they engage with the parents at the same time in a closed space, perhaps without the possibility of being separated when participating in the study? So we did have that concern alongside the concern for literacy, digital literacy and inclusion. Would all be informed on how to participate? Would they all understand the tool? We know we had practiced with COVID as a facilitator. This was identified. How could we prepare people to participate in a more meaningful way, perhaps using informative videos, trying to engage people using these novel tools? Another concern were the levels of distress either physical or emotional, that might be reported. So what would be the follow-up, the medical follow-up inclusively? Because we are dealing with very sensitive information regarding drug abuse, drug addiction, and medical records. So what is the medical follow-up regarding all of this? And this would have to be also clear in the eConsent platform. Regarding the transition to eConsent, if the study had already begun when lockdown came upon us, wouldn't adapting the study be the methodological failure or bias? So we would have to be very much aware of the research integrity component of the protocol design if we needed to change it because of lockdown. And another thing that the group discussed as a challenge would be whether we would record the exchange. Would we record the video or the audio? Neither. And this was a tension between protecting privacy or accepting that the recording would have cybersecurity issues, or going without the recording and then accepting that methodological shortcoming. And this was discussed by the group with a facilitator or a solution that would be selective recording, another ways of using technology like creating avatars and separate rooms so as to protect the privacy of the adolescents when participating, and trying to assure them that the recordings either would be only when necessary, perhaps only voice, perhaps only parts of the conversation, and then would be destroyed once transcribed. And this also begged the question, what about AI technologies for recording and transcribing and summarizing conversations? So this was also a concern, mainly regarding third-party companies that might have access, either the platform in which the exchange was taking place, the meeting, but also the AI technologies and systems used to summarize the conversations regarding those sensitive data. We also discussed whether we should test the legibility of the consent by performing a quiz at the end. And we had mixed feelings about this because adolescents might felt like this was a bit of a game and they might not be truthful with their answers, or they might become disengaged. We also talked about how about if they interacted with a bot or a fictional character played by an actor in which they could feel more at ease to ask difficult questions or share their traumatic experiences. And we also explored this issue alongside the possibility of having someone that had already had drug abuse issues and might be called in as a facilitator to the conversation. Going forward, would it be a good idea to co-design the consent platform? Yes, I'm just closing up.
Yeah, perfect.
And embed an ethics committee as an ethics advisor moving forward. I do believe that I covered the notes. If my colleagues would like to add to what I said, please do. Thank you.
Thank you, Cynthia. That was really, really extensive and insightful. Thank you.
Yeah, I have to compete with AI. We have to.
We discussed a lot. Group 3, I'm not sure it was group 3 though.
I can sum up the discussion for group 3.
Thank you.
I will try to focus on the things that have not been heard from the other two groups. Authentication was the number one thing that we discussed. So how we would actually authenticate the participation of the underage, and whether there should be some kind of parental involvement or at least chaperoning, especially for the adolescents. A point that was also raised in our group was that we should distinguish between research and treatment. because the actual description of the case included some type of screening, counseling, and referral to treatment. So perhaps the whole procedure or the actual informed consent could be different in the different cases of research only or treatment included, and that there is the risk of re-traumatizing the participants through this process. So this is something that came up. Another issue that we discussed is whether the ethics committee could actually follow up the electronic informed consent with a face-to-face, in-person procedure, when this would be possible, considering, of course, the circumstances of the lockdown. So perhaps this hybrid approach is better in order not to miss any things that could be missed through the electronic procedure. And that we should not replace the human-to-human interaction, at least, as a whole. Finally, data protection and privacy was an issue for us, but the colleagues have already discussed this. And a final point is that perhaps this process of electronic informed consent is more appealing to certain age groups compared to others. For example, in lower ages, it could be more appealing compared to the elderly, for example. That's it. I don't know if colleagues would like to add something.
Thank you, Vicky. It was a lot of interesting reflection points. And now the last group.
Yes, so that would be my. So I will. I think also most of what we discussed has already been said, especially that we're working with a vulnerable population, and it was also raised that maybe because the age range is quite broad, 12-year-olds up until 17-year-olds, that maybe a distinction could be made in separate forms depending on the age. And that also maybe for a 17-year-old, the consent by the parent would not be needed, and that it could be the adolescent themselves who consents instead of just the assent. But I think the other things that we had were already mentioned by other groups.
Thank you very much. Actually, now I'm leaving the floor to Kaat because she is going to tell us how the case was actually handled in real life.
Yes. So you see my slides again, right?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So how did they approach this in real life? So, of course, as you all already mentioned, it was important that the interests of the participants were upheld, so their well-being, but while maintaining the feasibility of the study, despite there being the COVID lockdown. So what the researchers of the study also mentioned is that it's, of course, a vulnerable population of minors who then are patients, but also because of the social isolation also in the COVID-19 pandemic. It was also a sensitive topic because the project that they were trying to implement was focused on alcohol and drug use, and as mentioned already, COVID restricted the in-person contact, and they also addressed that, of course, it's also important that if they would use any electronic tools, those would be compliant with HIPAA, because it was a study also conducted in the US, so there it's mostly HIPAA. So how did they approach this in real life? So they had 10 sites, as I already mentioned before, and COVID regulations differed from site to site. So what was allowable and possible also dependent on that. But they had actually 3 approaches. So whenever the COVID regulations would allow, they would just do the standard enrollment, which would be fully in person. Another option was a hybrid enrollment where they gave an in-person introduction, but to limit the time or to limit the possibility of also spreading the disease, they conducted the consent process, the consent part online. And then there was the option with a full electronic enrollment, but whenever possible, they would do in-person consent, and it would be in a fully electronic format, a phone or video conversation that they would also do with the participants, and also where they could ask the questions and would go with the participants through the consent. They also used platform RedCap for that, and they made sure that it was compliant with the HIPAA regulations. And they also went through a few cycles of designing it. So they also asked the staff members, in this case, who were conducting the enrollment or who were conducting the recruitment, challenges that they ran into, and they adapted based on that. And they also provided training on taking off eConsent for the staff at all sites. So that's how they approached this. So I think that's everything from my side.
Thank you very much, Kaat. There is still a few minutes if any of you have additional questions or comments on how the case was handled in real life. Yes, Jane.
Oh, hello there. Out of interest, how many teenagers were consented? Thank you.
Don't know by heart anymore, but there were not a lot. I think 25 participants during the COVID part of the study.
So that's quite low, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. But there is no information on how much people they already enrolled before, if I'm correct. No, only the full total at the end, so no. But it might have impacted indeed the recruitment numbers.
That's really interesting. It would also be interesting to know how much qualitative information they got, because although not many responded, the information would have been really helpful. But presumably there are also flags within that for further follow-up, I'm guessing. And also if the parents had any concerns as well. Was that monitored? Thank you.
So as far as I remember, they only looked at the staff side, how they experienced the consenting process, and adapted based on their feedback. But it did not involve the feedback from the parents and the adolescents.
Thank you.
But that would have indeed been very useful.
Absolutely.
Joanna?
Yeah, very quick question. The platform that you showed us before, is it something that you are developing under the Changer project, I understand? Is it going to be provided through the project or developed as a tool that can be used for others at a certain point? You're muted, Alice.
Sorry, the eConsent platform.
Yeah, I can maybe answer to that. Yeah, there was never the goal of this project to develop an eConsent module or tool, although there are some platforms available online, I mean, commercial providers. Okay. So our training is more about, like we see this development in having an impact on our research ethics committees. This project is really focused on ethics review. And the question is, how will ethics committees deal with this development and what are points of attention there?
Yeah, well, our experience with our ethics committee is that they do not accept eConsent at the moment. So I don't know. We need to explore. Well, indeed, we are monitored by two ethics committees, one accepting, the other not. So it's not even
Of
clear.
course, it's the question, what do we mean? Do we accept
Yeah,
it
exactly.
or not? Because we accept it, of course, very obviously. I mean, the first level that Janos explained, if you have an online survey, I mean, these things exist. People say that you can read, you receive information, and you say approve. These are things that we already do. I don't think the ethics committee is not doing this. Of course, going a step further, if you think about studies where there are kind of more increased risk, where the question is to what extent does this complement, replaces the normal interaction, and then high risk, more environments. Think about drugs. I mean, studies. Then of course it's an older ballroom, I would say, and bringing a lot of more concerns and issues, and where we can see and should see where it's maybe an addition, but how does it then interact with the regulatory and ethical requirements that we have in a regular clinical trial setting.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you. Other questions? In that case, we reached the end of our training. Thank you all so much for participating, and especially for participating actively. And yeah, I hope to see you soon in the next training, which should be the 8th of June, if I'm not wrong. Thank you very much.